All right, everyone. So it is that time of the year again where we all make our predictions for the upcoming Premier League season, only to go back and laugh at ourselves come May. So I'm going to do precisely that. Just, predict the entire table from 20th all the way to 1st. And then I'll also throw out some of my other predictions. So, who's going to win the Golden Boot, who's going to win Player of the Year, all that sort of stuff. Then I'll make sure to put those predictions in the comments so you guys can go ahead and roast me for them at any point throughout the season if you would like. So, without further ado, let's start. And we're going to start in last place. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be Leicester City. I really don't. I like Leicester as a football club. I think they're a massive inspiration. I mean, the year they won the league, I think it was like 5,000 to 1 odds for them to win it. And it was honestly one of the greatest stories in the history of sport, really. But now I just don't see where they stay up. I mean, they've lost Enzo Maresca to Chelsea. They've lost their best player, Kieran Dewsbury Hall, to Chelsea as well. And they've replaced him with the guy from Fulham. What's his name? He's like, oh yeah, Reed. So I would say that's definitely a downgrade for Leicester. And then they've replaced Maresca with Steve Cooper, who is also a downgrade in my opinion. So really, Leicester have just gotten weaker coming into the Premier League. And there's also the potential of a points deduction. So could be between 6 and 15 points, which I think without the points deduction, Leicester maybe have a chance. But with the points deduction, that's really just going to be the nail in the coffin for them. So 20th place for Leicester. 19th is going to be Southampton. They're in a very similar position, in my opinion, to Leicester. They've got a young squad, a young manager in Russell Martin. Not really sure how well he's going to adapt to the Premier League. Again, Southampton are just in this kind of position where I don't think they've strengthened enough, and they've really come back to the Premier League in a weaker position than they were relegated from. So, again, just not a club I could really see staying up. Now, moving on, I think 18th place is really up for grabs. I think Wolves, Forest, Ipswich, Brentford, maybe. They could all go down. I think they all have really massive flaws that could send them to the championship. But I'm going with Wolves to be relegated. A bit of a surprise. I think Wolves, I love Gary O'Neill. I think he's absolutely fantastic. But I think this is the year where the Gary O'Neill magic runs out. I really just, Wolves over the last 2 years have basically been gutted of all of their talent. I mean, last year it was Neves, Moutinho, Traore, Raul Jimenez, Nathan Collins, Connor Cody. This year, Max Kilman and Pedro Neto. If they kept Neto, I think they'd stay up because I think he's genuinely one of the best wingers in the Premier League. But of course, he's gone to Chelsea. And I think, we saw how poorly Wolves did last year when the injuries started to pile up. They have a very thin squad. And that squad's going to be even weaker this year. So I honestly I don't see Wolves staying up. Moving on, 17th is going to be Ipswich. I really like what Kieran McKenna's done at Ipswich. Of course, back-to-back promotions is already fantastic. But just adding Premier League survival to that would really just be the cherry on top for Ipswich Town. But what I like the most about what they've done is they've kept their core group of players together. So if you look at teams like Sheffield United or Burnley, teams that have come out of the championship, they used a lot of loan players. And so they didn't they didn't manage to keep them, and so they lost a lot of their talent that they used to get out of the championship, and that ultimately cost them in the Premier League. But Ipswich haven't really done that. They've kept a core group of players. I like Kieran McKenna as a manager. I do think that they will struggle in the Premier League. McKenna's not a very experienced manager at the top level, but I really think I think he is the real deal, and I think he will have Ipswich survive. Just barely. I think they'll probably end up surviving on the last day, but I really do like what they've been doing. So moving on to 16th, it's going to be Nottingham Forest. There we go. So Forest, I think, will show marginal improvements this season. Nuno's going to have a full season in charge, so that'll be good. He'll have a preseason. And overall, I think Nottingham Forest have the talent to be finishing around mid-table. I mean, if you look at Awani, Gibbs-White, Alanga, Hudson-Odoi, these are all good players, but for one reason or another, it just hasn't gelled for them. Right? They don't really look like a cohesive team. Whenever I watch them play, they look really like a group of some pretty talented individuals, but not a whole lot of a semblance of a team out there. And that's what I think is ultimately going to hold them back. But I think they will survive off of talent alone. So 16th place. 15th, I think, is going to be Brentford. Brentford had a really tough season last year. When you look at Ivan Toney being suspended, Brian Mbeumo being injured, David Raya being at Arsenal. Again, their best players were either, not available or, were just really rusty and underperforming because they'd been out for so long. And I think a similar thing is going to happen again. I do think Ivan Toney being at the club for a full season is going to keep them in the league. But, Raya going to Arsenal on a permanent deal really, really weakens them. Mark Flecken did not look good at all last season. I swear, every time I watched him, he just looked like he was going to chuck the ball in his own net. But ultimately, I think the two saving graces for Brentford are Ivan Toney and Thomas Frank. I think Toney will stay. He'll keep him in the league. Of course, he will go for free next summer, which is really bad for Brentford. But in terms of this season, he's going to absolutely be good enough to keep him up. And Thomas Frank, he's a fantastic manager. He's been way overperforming with this Brentford squad. And I really think it's the kind of situation where as long as he stays, I think Brentford stay in the league. 14th place is going to be Fulham. So Fulham, I think, are in a very similar position to Brentford, where Marco Silva is such a good manager. I think as long as he stays, I think Fulham will be a Premier League team. They have had a rough transfer window, especially defensively. They've lost Palhinha to Bayern Munich. They've lost Tosin and Adebayo to Chelsea. But they have brought in Emil Smith-Rowe. And Smith-Rowe, I think, is going to be the key player for them. Because if he can rediscover his form from 2021, then Fulham will have one of the best ball carriers in the Premier League. They'll have, someone who can play number 10. He can play wide left. He can probably play wide right as well. And ultimately, I think he's going to be fantastic for Fulham. Next up, 13th is going to be Everton. They had such a good season last year, surviving despite the points deduction. They would have finished 12th if it wasn't for the points deduction. And I really just think Sean Dyche is getting it right. I know they weren't great going forward last year, but defensively they were so good. I think only Arsenal kept more clean sheets. I think they had the fourth fewest goals conceded. And I know they lost Amadou Onana to Aston Villa, but they have managed to keep Pickford and Jared Branthwaite. So I think another comfortable mid-table finish is coming up for Everton. Of course, if they get more points deducted, then that'll obviously affect their position. But as of right now, I don't think that's going to happen. So 13th place it is. Next up, I'm going to go with Bournemouth in 12th. I was planning on putting Bournemouth a lot higher, but the sale of Dominic Solanke, I think, is going to really hold them back this year from getting much better. You know, they had a really good season last year, record points total in the history of the club, and I think Iriola deserves so much praise. I mean, there were so many people doubting, myself included, by the way. I'll fully admit to this. You know, I did not think that the appointment of Iriola was going to be a good one. I thought he was going to flop in the Premier League. I thought getting rid of Gary O'Neill was an absolute disgrace. But he has proven me wrong, and he has been absolutely amazing at Bournemouth. So, you know, I think it's going to be another good season. Maybe a bit disappointing considering what it might have been if Solanke had stayed. But 12th place, it's going to be another pretty good season. Next up in 11th, I'm going to go with Brighton. Brighton are taking a massive gamble with their new manager. His name is Fabian Hurstler, I think it is. The youngest manager in Premier League history. He's only 31. And listen, I'm not saying young managers can't be good. I mean, this guy might end up being fantastic. But I do think that appointing young managers with no first division experience is a big risk. And ultimately, I think that's going to hold Brighton back if he doesn't really adjust to the Premier League particularly quickly. You know, he could take some time. We saw Vincent Kompany never really adapted to the Premier League. Iriola took his time. And so I think Hurstler could have a similar path as well. Brighton have also lost Pascal Gross, who was arguably their best player last season. And they've replaced him with Mats Weifer from Feyenoord. Decent player, but again, not really proven in the Premier League like Pascal Gross was. The good news for Brighton is that a lot of players they had out injured last year are coming back. So, you know, Mitoma, Solly Marsh, Julio Enciso, Estupinian. These guys are all coming back. And so when you add them to a squad with Adengara, Billy Gilmore, João Pedro. So Brighton have a good group of players that Hurstler will have to work with. And I think that will get them, you know, kind of around a mid-table finish. But honestly, if it clicks for Hurstler, I think Brighton could be back into the top 6 because they have such a good squad. Maybe not top 6, but definitely top 8, you know, fighting for those kind of European places. But right now, I think they're going to finish 11th. Moving on, I'm going to go with Crystal Palace in 10th. Back-to-back top half finishes for Oliver Glasner. Oliver Glasner is so good. I mean, this guy, the way he turned Palace around, I mean, they were sinking. They're just like a stone. You know, you throw a stone in the water and it just drops right to the bottom. That's really what Palace were like under Roy Hodgson. And Glasner came in and he just absolutely transformed that team. You know, he got Eze and Elise playing together. He turned Mateta into an absolute goal machine. And Palace would have finished 5th if the season started when Glasner was appointed. Now, obviously, I'm not saying they're going to finish 5th because I do think it takes a lot to maintain that sort of form for a full season. But I do think they're going to have another really good season. The one negative for me is that they have lost Elise to Bayern Munich, which, if they kept Elise, I genuinely think they would be finishing in the European spots. which is a real shame, again, because I would have really liked to see another season of Eze and Elise at Crystal Palace. But of course, for the sake of Elise's career, it'd be insane to not want to go to Bayern Munich. But, you know, they still have Eze, they still have Mateta, they still have Wharton in midfield, they still have Mark Gahey. I know he's been heavily linked with Newcastle, but as of the time I'm recording this, it's not a done deal yet. So I'm just going to make these predictions as if he's still a Crystal Palace player. And so I think it's going to be another top half finish for Palace. So next up, I think the rest of the top half of the table is really broken into three different categories. I think 9th to 7th, then 6th through 3rd, and then obviously 1st and 2nd. So let's start off with Chelsea in 9th, West Ham in 8th, and Spurs in 7th. So, Chelsea. Let's have a little conversation about Chelsea Football Club. Chelsea are an absolute mess. Let's just get that out there. They had a really good end to last season. Pochettino looked like he was finally getting it right. And then they just decide randomly, for no apparent reason, to get rid of him and bring in a novice. Let's be honest, Enzo Maresca is a novice. He's never coached in the first division before. And again, like I said, I'm not saying young managers can't be good, but to hire someone when your club is already in crisis, when you've got a bloated squad, they have 40 players in that squad. They have 8 goalkeepers. Not a single good one, by the way, but 8 goalkeepers in their first team. So, I honestly don't know what's going on at that club. Maresca has so much on his plate. He is tactically absolutely inept. I really don't get what he's doing there. They were so open in preseason on the transition. They're so bad. And ultimately, I think they're going to finish mid-table. When you look at the players they have, Cole Palmer's fantastic. Pedro Neto's fantastic, but he can never stay fit. And Nkunku's fantastic, can never stay fit. And the rest of the squad's bang average, let's be honest. I mean, is Mudryk really going to get you Champions League? Is Madueke going to get you Champions League? Nope, not at all. So Chelsea, mid-table, banter club, 9th place. Now, of course, if Chelsea get Victor Osimhen, which again has not happened as of when I'm recording this video, but if they get Osimhen, then I think they will finish in the top 4. But as of right now, 9th place. Next up, West Ham. I think they're about to absolutely cook under Julian Lopetegui. I think Lopetegui's a really good manager, and they've done some good business as well. They've brought in Fulkrug, Todibo, Somerville. These are good players. They finally have another striker besides Mikel Antonio. They've got a real quality center back in, and they've managed to keep the likes of Bowen, Kudos, Paqueta, Edson Alvarez, Ward-Prowse. So the foundations are there for a really good team. The only thing I could see holding them back is that there is going to be a bit of a transition between David Moyes and his more kind of low block counter-attacking team to Julian Lopetegui, who's going to be more of a possession-based style. And I really think that transition is the only thing that's holding West Ham back from finishing in the European spots. But mark my words, next 2-3 years, West Ham are going to be absolutely fantastic. Next up, Tottenham. I think Tottenham's project has gone a bit stale under Ange Postecoglou. They pulled off an absolute miracle last season, going from top of the league after 10 games to finishing outside the Champions League places. I mean, it's really an implosion unlike anything we've ever really seen. I mean, when was the last time a team went from first after 10 games to not even getting into the top 4? I mean, that kind of collapse is really astonishing. And ultimately, they've not had a good transfer window. They brought in Solanke, who I think is a good striker. And then they brought in Archie Gray for their midfield. But they needed so much more. And this, honestly, I very rarely do this, but I honestly think that Tottenham fans are to blame for this kind of lack of success. And again, I don't do this a lot. I don't like to blame the fans for a team not doing well. But in the case of Tottenham, I think it's 100% warranted. I mean, if you look at the way they were celebrating doing the Poznan when they lost to Man City, it just tells you all you need to know about the state of that club. Because ultimately, that loss prevented them from getting Champions League and prevented them from really reinforcing their squad this summer. And right now, I mean, there are so many teams going. I mean, honestly, I think the teams from 9th all the way to 3rd are probably going to be going for those Champions League places. And so, there's no guarantee they get it. And last season was their best chance, and they threw it away. So, yeah, I think for Tottenham fans to be celebrating that just tells you everything you need to know about the state of that club. And I feel bad for Postecoglou. I think he's a good manager. Yes, he is defensively absolutely inept. The guy does not know how to organize a defense to save his life. But I think overall, he does have some good ideas, and he is absolutely wasting his time at Tottenham. I would not be surprised to see him leave the club before the end of the season. Moving on to 6th, I think it's going to be Newcastle. 5th is going to be Manchester United. 4th is going to be Aston Villa. And 3rd is going to be Liverpool. I think all of these teams have a real, genuine shot at the top 4. I think Newcastle probably have to invest a little bit more in terms of their squad depth before I consider them really capable of getting back into the top 4. Ultimately, they've done well to keep the likes of Bruno, Isak, Anthony Gordon, but I still think they need more. They were so bad defensively last year, and I know Nick Pope was injured, Sven Botman was injured. Botman's going to be out until December, so they're still going to have that issue. Trippier's getting older, did not look very good last season, did not look very good during the Euros. And then Dan Burn had some pretty rough patches last season as well. They do have the kid from Southampton, I think it was, Livermento. Looks like a quality player. Is he really ready to take that first team spot? Probably at left back, maybe at right back. We don't really know. I think he is. I think he's going to be better than Dan Burn. Might be better than Trippier right now, but we'll have to wait and see. But for me, again, the issue with Newcastle is the squad depth. Again, if you look at, they're getting Tonali back from suspension, they're getting Joe Linton back from injury, but behind those two, there really isn't a ton of quality, and I think that's what's going to hold them back, because the teams above them have much better squads overall. I think in terms of starting 11, Newcastle are as good as anyone, bar Arsenal and Man City. But in terms of the squad depth, that's where I think they need a bit more investment. 5th place, I think the Champions League spots are going to be just out of reach for Manchester United. They've done some interesting business this window. I'd be lying if I said it was horrific. I think United they've definitely improved. But I would also be lying if I said that it was absolutely, world-changing, Man United are going to win the league because of their transfer window. No, it's nothing like that, but it is a very decent summer window. Lenny Yoro, of course, he's injured now, but when he comes back from injury, I think he's going to be... he's going to be inconsistent. He's 18. I don't think that anyone should be overhyping him too much, but I do think that he will develop into a very, very good defender. Matthias de Ligt, I think, is a decent upgrade on the likes of Maguire or Johnny Evans. And then I think Mesraoui is a fantastic signing. Play left back, right back. I've seen him play, kind of right-sided midfield for Bayern Munich. So I think he's a very good signing. I think Joshua Zirkzee is a very good signing as well. Will definitely add more goals into that Man United team. Ultimately, I think what's going to hold them back is keeping Eric Ten Hag. I mean, you guys know my opinion on Ten Hag. I think he's absolutely atrocious. Yes, he can pull off, a cup run to save his job, but ultimately the guy is not capable of putting together a consistent, high quality league campaign over 38 games. He just isn't. He's tactically an absolute clown. United have not scored more than 60 goals in a Premier League season under Ten Hag. So I think that's ultimately what's going to hold them back. Plus, I think there's a lot of young players in the squad. You're looking at Kobe Mainu, Amad Diallo, Garnacho, Lenny Yoro. Again, these guys, they have the potential to be, some of the best players in their position in the Premier League. But right now, it's still very much a work in progress. So I think with Manchester United, give them time and give them a better manager, I think they'll be very, very good. But right now, can't really see them getting Champions League. Next up, Aston Villa, I think, will retain their Champions League spots. In my opinion, I think they've won the transfer window again. I think they won it last summer. It was an unbelievable window. This summer, they've won it again. I mean, Amadou Onana, Ross Barkley, Ian Maatsen, unbelievable signings. For me, they could honestly go right into Villa's first team. Ross Barkley was so underrated last season at Luton Town. Onana was one of the best defensive midfielders in the league last season. And Ian Maatsen just played in the Champions League final. I mean, he's fantastic. So ultimately, I think Villa do have enough. They have lost Douglas Luiz to Juventus, and Moussa Diaby's gone to Saudi Arabia. But they've kept Ollie Watkins, Leon Bailey, Pau Torres. John McGinn was a key player for them last season. They've kept him. Diego Carlos, Emi Martinez. They have such a good team, and they have an absolute genius at the helm. I think Aston Villa is the perfect club for Unai Emery. I think Emery doesn't do well when he's at the biggest clubs in the world. Your Arsenal, PSG, he really didn't do well there. But at a club like Sevilla, he obviously did well. Villarreal, Aston Villa, he is absolutely unreal. And I think tactically he is just as good as any manager in the world, bar Pep, Klopp, Ancelotti. But in kind of that next rung down of managers, he is as good as anyone else. Liverpool in third, maybe a bit iffy if they're going to go through a kind of Arsenal post-Wenger, United post-Sir Alex Ferguson kind of drop-off. But I think Jurgen Klopp has left Liverpool in a really good spot. I do think it's absolute lunacy that they're not making any signings. But, I mean, FSG's been doing this for years, and Klopp kind of insulated them and protected them because he got so much more out of that Liverpool squad than he should have got. And now Arne Slot's come in, might not be the same results. And ultimately, I think Liverpool will be fine. They still have Trent, they still have Van Dijk, they still have Alisson, they still have Salah. So a lot of those key pieces from Jurgen Klopp are still there. But, of course, there's still the issue of not having a defensive midfielder at the club. I know they have Endo, but is he really what Liverpool are looking for? I don't think so. If they got Zubimendi, then I think they would be much more comfortable. I still think they have enough to make the top four, but they're going to be a long way behind second. There's really not enough there for a title challenge, but I do think that they will just about get over that line. I think Liverpool and Villa, it's going to be very close, but I think Liverpool and Villa just have a little bit more than United, Newcastle, Tottenham, those other teams. So, now we have the most exciting part of this video, and that is who is going to win the Premier League. I think both Arsenal and Man City could win it. Last year, I said that City were going to win the league at the start of the year. Then, kind of halfway through, City were not playing well, and I thought that Arsenal might have a shot, only for City to go on one of their Man City, 30-some-odd game unbeaten run and win the league again. This season, it's kind of interesting because neither of them have had a particularly good transfer window, I would say. I definitely think Arsenal's has been better, signing Ryan a permanent deal, bringing in Calafiori, potentially bringing in Mikel Merino, although that deal hasn't, for some reason, that deal has not gotten done yet, which I am just absolutely baffled by. Whereas Man City, I think Man City have very comfortably gotten worse. I mean, they've lost Julian Alvarez and replaced him with Savinho. Now, Savinho is a good player. I saw him in the Community Shield. Looks to be pretty decent. But is he an upgrade on Alvarez? Absolutely not. There were rumors of maybe De Bruyne leaving, maybe Ederson leaving. Those haven't really materialized, so they're still at Man City, which is good for City fans. Arsenal have lost Smith Rowe. Nketiah was going to go to Marseille, but that deal completely collapsed. So, unfortunately, he's still at the club. So, really, I think Arsenal and City have had pretty similar transfer windows. And ultimately, I think it's really going to come down to who is mentally more up for it, who can kind of keep their intensity for the entire year. Because when you look at the quality in the two teams, I think City definitely have a bit more proven quality in terms of they've won the league, they've won 4 in a row, they've won the treble, they won the Champions League, all that sort of stuff. Arsenal obviously haven't really won anything major since 2020. And I think, again, it's going to come down to, do Arsenal have what it takes to really go again and use not winning the league as motivation to go out and actually get over the line this time? Because Arsenal definitely have the squad to do it. I think Calafiori completely revolutionizes the defense, not needing to worry about having, Zinchenko or Kivior at left back, who are, maybe not, Kivior is obviously not a left back, and Zinchenko just does not know how to defend, but having someone like Calafiori there, having someone like Timber back from injury, obviously Tomiyasu is going to be coming back from injury pretty soon. Arsenal are so strong defensively. And I think that is ultimately what's going to lead them to a Premier League title. So yes, I'm going to go with Man City in second and Arsenal in first. Obviously, I think City have a better attack. If you're looking at Erling Haaland, they have something that Arsenal don't in a kind of clinical box presence kind of number 9. But if you look at City defensively, they were not very good last season. Rodri is going to get absolutely gassed out. He played the entire season last year, the entire Euros. And when City don't have Rodri, they don't win. I mean, he missed 4 games last season, and they lost all 4. So I think that's a massive gap in City's squad that they're potentially overlooking. And ultimately, I just think, 4 in a row was obviously historic. 5 in a row, I just don't see it happening. I really do not see City winning 5 Premier League titles in a row. And I think this is Arsenal's year. This is the year it has to happen. You know, they've been improving every single year. This young squad is maturing. I think a lot of the players are now approaching the peak of their career. If you're looking at, Saka, Odegaard, Rice, Saliba, Gabriel, Ben White, Martinelli, Havertz, these are all young players that are going to massively improve this season. And that's what's going to push Arsenal over the line. So, Arsenal are going to win the Premier League title. City are going to come second. Liverpool third. Villa fourth. Now, let's go over some of my other predictions for the season. So, for my Golden Boot winner, I'm going to go with Haaland. I think it's pretty self-explanatory why he's going to win it. I mean, he just is a robot. He is a robot. Player of the season, I'm going to go with Martin Odegaard. Again, captain. Arsenal are going to win the league. I think Odegaard's already the best attacking midfielder in the world right now. Obviously, if De Bruyne gets back to form, then it would be De Bruyne. But as of right now, De Bruyne's not been that good, and Odegaard is just fantastic. So he's going to be player of the season. Young player of the season, I think, is probably going to go to Cole Palmer again. I think, again, Cole Palmer is going to be the only really good thing about Chelsea. And I think he's going to, again, just completely carry them to a top half finish, which for a tiny little club like Chelsea is pretty good. And last thing I'm going to predict is the first manager to get sacked. And this one is actually quite tricky, but I'm going to go with Steve Cooper at Leicester City. I think Steve Cooper is going to be the first manager sacked. So, of course, make sure to get into the comments, comment your predictions, player of the season, young player of the season, first manager sacked, Golden Boot winner, all that stuff. Oh, and I forgot to mention my overachievers. I'm going to go with Villa for retaining top 4, and my underachievers are obviously going to be Chelsea. So make sure you get in the comments, and I will see you all in a bit.